Hello everyone. Today we have with us none other than Patrik Schumacher,
Thank you for having me.
who is principal in Zaha Hadid Architects and joined the firm back in 1990. Patrik studied philosophy, mathematics, architecture, and then completed his PhD in 1999.
It correlates nicely with profit, and so it should be, because that developer who got the knack, who got the right methodology, if his money is replenished and some, it is the next great thing. We are looking for very special projects around the world, and we are sought out by special clients. Part with Zaha's own conception of her work was to complete the incomplete project of modernism. Explorations, particular artistic explorations, she saw in the work of the suprematists and constructivists in Russia. My motivation is, I've been accused of, I'm only interested in the rich, only interested in money and so on and so on. Human flourishing. Creative industry hubs or urban agglomerations where you have these network effects between companies coming together and clustering and working together, collaborating, knowledge exchange, embedding universities within that. It's culture of stuff, but this kind of urban texture is of the knowledge economy. Or in my philosophy, if you a successful business venture and business model in urban development, it can only make money and make a return if it satisfies end users, if it is fully utilized, if it is vibrant, and if the products are seen to be attractive and worth what they have cost to build. That's best for the world, for society, for our life. We have more pleasant and fulfilling lives. We need economic freedom. There's too much red tape. To become and that means a lot of smaller firms run into these barriers and compliance regimes and difficulties. That's why you have these kind of indexes of ease to do business around the world, and it correlates massively with GDP per capita and development and growth trajectories. So more freedom usually works, and society seems to be erring on the side of unfreedom, and probably lifting restrictions, or even randomly, just kind of deleting, every year 5% of the restrictions over the next 10 years. Even if you pick them at random, it's probably going to improve society. That's how I feel about our political process.
Hello everyone. Today we have with us none other than Patrik Schumacher, who is principal in Zaha Hadid Architects and joined the firm back in 1990. Patrik studied philosophy, mathematics, architecture, and then completed his PhD in 1999. Welcome to our show, Patrik, and thank you for accepting our invitation and taking some time out today from your busy schedule.
Thank you for having me.
So to begin with, this podcast has 3 segments. The first segment will be regarding your opinions and collaborations. My first question here is, in honor of Zaha Hadid's birthday, which was last week on October 31st,
that's right.
Could you take us through the design philosophy that Zaha Hadid Architects uses for every project, from concept to completion, and how has it evolved over the years? How was your experience working with Zaha, and how does the ideology align at that point?
So we are looking for very special projects around the world. And we are sought out by special clients who want to live in the 21st century without any nostalgia, and who like architecture to be part of a stimulating environment in the context of innovative companies or innovative cultural institutions. So that's to begin with a good premise to do something special. So we are looking out for creating something which is original and specific to place and purpose, And we also try to find in every project an opportunity to innovate for something more generally, to contribute to the culture and development of architecture as a discipline to the built environment. So something which points beyond the particular success of this project, something which might be generalized. So more generalizable innovation or original feature we try to find in each project.
And what was the philosophy when you started? What were the core values of Zaha Hadid Architects when it started? When the idea is incepted?
Zaha's own conception of her work was to complete the incomplete project of modernism. So she was a modernizer, and because at the time when she started her career, architecture had shifted into postmodernism. Sorry.
That's all right.
And that postmodernism was a critique of modernism, and to some extent a reversion to to traditional forms, although it was initially quite playful. But it also became clear that it would be really quite serious traditionalism would come in, and this kind of neoclassicism would evolve out of this. So that's what we experienced in the 80s. So then her conception was to, in a way, go back and complete the incomplete project of modernism. That she looked at particular of explorations, particular artistic explorations she saw in the work of the suprematists and constructivists in Russia, the Russian avant-garde. And that's quite true, that there were quite extraordinary, complex dynamic compositions, which didn't make it into the canon of modernism, the way modernism was then rolled out throughout the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And so going back to that as a source of inspiration to elaborate modernism. Modernism, it came to some kind of stalemate or problem in the 70s, where it seemed to be mismatching aspirations for more diversity, for architecture that was more complex forms, re-inhabiting the historic centers as well, which is interesting. So that the modernism of the 70s or late 60s and 70s started to fail society. And that's when you had postmodernism looking back at more traditional forms and concepts of urban space and the city. And Zaha was looking back at the beginnings of modernism and saw that there was a kind of unfulfilled promise in a lot of very, very rich exploration, which had much higher levels of complexity and dynamism, and which turned out that she was quite right. The intuition, building up from there, was really turned out to be a way of elaborating a new paradigm, which would supersede eventually modernism, without going back to traditional forms.
She was living ahead of her times, really.
And I mean, there were colleagues that, there was a number of people who were having this feeling, and that became the deconstructivists. There was this show at MoMA in 1988. Actually, that's also the year I joined the company, when I saw Zaha speaking at the Tate Gallery in London, anticipating the big MoMA show on deconstructivist architecture, which was curated by Philip Johnson. Was quite an interesting event, and all the protagonists, there were only 7 architects in that show, had fantastic careers afterwards. So she wasn't alone, but she was perhaps the most proliferous and most dynamic, and the one in that group who was working a lot with curvature and curvilinearity, which actually was the clue to do the next level of complexity without generating compositions which become illegible or visual chaos nearly. So the deconstructivist techniques of layering interpenetrating forms, angular forms in particular, without having a curve to integrate, these became kind of nearly indigestible compositions. They were more like provocation than something which could be acceptable or could be really productive for developing architecture further. So deconstructivism turned out to be an interesting avant-gardist movement that pushed architecture forward, but could not itself, was abandoned after about 10 years.
Nice. What an experience. What built environment lessons do you think emerging markets like India, Middle East, and Africa should take from developed countries like Singapore, US, and UK?
Interesting. I mean, well, India is fascinating. I mean, the urbanization is very rapid. It's not only population growth, but it's, people moving into cities. From the thousands of villages and small towns you find in India, they're concentrating into large cities, and you have to, as India becomes affluent, there's certain standards of accommodation, and you're rolling out these massive satellite towns or flocks of high-rise towers, which don't add up to an urban fabric. You remain then reliant on transport systems to reconnect, and these are I've seen them, they're kind of islands in the landscape spread around, connected by highways, and maybe, if you're lucky, by a train or something. So that is a problematic urbanization model. I mean, understand that to get the quantity rapidly of reasonably comfortable apartments, but it's problematic in terms of generating really an urban texture and urban life, where we're talking about in the Western metropolis about walkability, about densifying and building out brownfield sites as industry recedes and harbors, etc., are repurposed, and you get a nicer living conditions, which is more oriented around easy access of facilities, of connectedness between work and leisure and residences. I'm not sure that's easy to replicate. I mean, look, in Chinese cities is similar to India. And also the main cities, even in the central parts, you have these mega blocks and mega highways. Manhattan is a better model for densification, where you have many more streets. You have all these streets and avenues and more connectivity, not that hierarchy of major highways and then more isolated blocks, and you can densify. The height of buildings isn't the problem. In New York, they're actually part of an urban texture that works. In India and China, they become more like a suburban texture. But suburbia in England was, row houses, single family, or terrace houses. Suburbia in India is, rows of 30-story buildings. Look, there's a quantitative issue there, and maybe not everybody can participate, but if you still build out your cities in that way of more dense and let's say with the attempt to generate urbanity with more kind of grids and networks and more street spaces, and which also allow for sidewalks and pedestrian circulation, and obviously you need to build out your public infrastructure transport network as well, because it's important. We have to think about creative industry hubs or urban agglomerations where you get these network effects between companies coming together and clustering and working together, collaborating, knowledge exchange, embedding universities within that. It's culture of startup companies. This kind of urban texture is of the knowledge economy is what we are looking for when we develop master plans. And I think a good example what we've done is in One North in Singapore, a very dense mixed use development area where you have also a articulation into financial companies, biomedical companies, IT companies. There's a little bit of sub-districts, but there's also quite a bit of residential mixed in. So it's not before the equivalent would have been an industry park where you have each building is separated out with a big car park and a fence around it, and there was no urbanity, no urban life, and then residences were something else. So we've done a different conception, and that would match this idea of knowledge economy and what I call a network society, a post-Wallace network society. Right. The lessons of that I think are interesting, and a place like London is trying this as having zones which are really great, like the City of London, which has this amazing intensity. But in London, you have some glimpses of this, but because of planning restrictions, that kind of development slowed down too much, is not dense enough, and you have this kind of housing crisis where there is a lack of supply due to a political system which has too many barriers and burdens to develop. So, I mean, in terms of London, of course, the core historic districts, I'm not saying that they should be overrun by towers. But outside that, yes, it could be a much more dense cityscape, and doesn't have to be always towers. You have these fields of row houses, which could be, 5, 6, 7 stories, and get an urbanity more like the kind of central, let's say, George and Edwardian zones. So I'm not saying there's an ideal model in a city like London, but there are glimpses of, great, let's say, examples like the square mile of the financial district, the City of London, or I mentioned large parts of New York, or the whole of Manhattan nearly is. It could be a great example, and it's inexhaustible because there's always. I mean, they haven't fully developed all of Manhattan yet. So, so there's and of course there's churning. You should also allow for, which you find nicely in the City of London, that as it evolves, as quality of spaces and standards shift, there's also substitution. You can build a new tower over an old tower. You take down also an older tower. That's also starting to be possible in New York. And of course, we have now also more the repurposing philosophy. But still, you can repurpose, densify, and build on top. Or if you have to, and I would always say, repurposing cannot become some kind of dogma. You have to also intensify the land use in areas where you have the synergy clusters. And so Canary Wharf was another interesting and successful project. And they are now in the process of rebuilding and upgrading and developing much more public spaces and allowing more residential in. They are at the moment a bit hampered by this dogma, only repurpose, don't rebuild. So things become slow and more expensive. And really, I mean, all you keep is some kind of is the core and maybe some slabs, and then you emerge a new building out of this. It's a little bit dogmatic, but still, Canary Wharf is now after 30 years after its creation, or 35 years after its creation, in an interesting process of rejuvenation and expansion. So these are interesting models. They're more similar to what you could imagine in India or China, because they're on the outskirts and building a totally new fabric. And so there are interesting examples to look at, and not only Canary Wharf, the whole eastern, the developments around various dockland basins, etc., is an interesting example.
Nice. You have covered my 2 questions in this actually. The another thing with Zaha Hadid have always been incorporating cross-functional industry tools, such as software development, automobile manufacturing, aircraft design, and cinematography as well. How do you believe the industry as a whole, including clients, has reached a level of maturity where it can effectively fulfill architects' needs, visionary needs?
Well, that's an infinite project. It's an ongoing upgrading, which I perceived during my career. Productivity gains are fantastic. I mean, what we can produce, how fast we can produce it, with amount of detail, and how many variations we can test out and explore, and also make changes to a highly evolved project. It's unbelievable the productivity gains we had. And that didn't mean that we reduced staff in the architecture, but we just generated so much more valuable product, where we give much more certainty and much more simulate the outcome, so the decision makers can make much more high quality decisions, And obviously also this is demanded, cost certainty and sticking to therefore the time schedules and budgets, but also knowing exactly what you're getting through photorealistic renderings and all sorts of measures through all those fantastic empowerment through the computation on many fronts, whether it's visual simulations, whereas we do agent-based occupancy simulations, all the engineering disciplines coming in, your geometric coordination and avoiding mistakes on site, etc., etc. But also particularly at the front end, to have quickly a lot of exploration simulations of the potential of a site, of a brief, and that's been amazing. I think that contributed a lot to the increased quality of the built environment and of particular buildings. On the urban scale, there we see a lot of problems because politics gets in the way, and it's harder to generate a coherent urban texture. So there the examples are thinner spread. But on the architectural side, there's been enormous progress through my career, and this will continue, and we're at the forefront of developing tools, expanding our expertise. I mean, we're still not, it will never stop, but one thing is very important where we not having yet a full grasp is what I call the social functionality. So when it comes to technical functionality of our buildings, we can fully anticipate them. We have measures, we have tools, we have expertise. When it comes to social functionality, we have to just build up these tools, and I see a huge role for agent-based simulations. And these are, parallel to this agent-based models used in the social sciences, that you can actually try to simulate a complex interaction processes with agent populations which are highly differentiated according to, for instance, in the corporate world, team affiliation, status degree, activity profiles, and how they might interact, how one can maximize encounters, maximize opportunities for turning encounters into interactional conversations, in one-to-one or in larger or smaller groups, and how one quickly can shift the scene. That's another of my topics, to make architecture more flexible, that it adapts more quickly to different demands, not only when one company moves out and a new one comes in, but I mean within the company dynamic between mornings and afternoons, between those days which are hybrid and those days which people come into the office, but also scenarios between group and workshop dynamics, conferencing dynamics. It needs a lot of flexibility, and I think these are things where we have a lot yet to work on. And finally, I want to mention the integration, in particular talking about work environments and this idea of hybrid events. Every single event is either purely virtual or hybrid. We really hardly have any meeting which is purely based on physical co-presence. So we need to always but we also want to come together. And then there's always some people dialing in, and that's the same with teaching and in the academic arena, with conferencing usually. Most panels I've been sitting on, either I was sit there as a TV screen, or I was sitting there and the TV screen was next to me. And so to think that's true, we're just starting. And for me, that's part of the big story of the metaverse and integrating virtual and physical spaces into some kind of virtual physical integration, or the way I call it.
We studied your article regarding the substantial gap between architecture education and practical implementation on DZine platform. I think it was there. How do you think that this gap could be filled, and what changes do you recommend an education model to be implemented for next coming years?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it can be done through institutional mechanisms. This is a cultural question. So it's a question of discourse and the discourse culture. And it's just been, it's at the very moment where we have all these new exciting possibilities. We're exploring AI and architecture on many levels, not only AI and the big language models, but we, as I said, the metaverse is coming and there's a huge interesting task. So we at the Design Research Lab in London, we are exploring these topics, and it's been critical for the last 25 years I've been teaching there, that a lot of the topics we are now rolling out in the firm we started with research at the AA Design Research Lab, including, by the way, the agent-based simulations I was just talking about, but also our interest in parametric urbanism and having an urban fields where you have more degrees of continuity and variety. You get unified urban images and urban district identities, yet highly differentiated. A very important paradigm developed first at Design Research Lab, as well as our interest in what I now call tectonism, expressing all the structure, so showing skeletons, working with shell structures, tensile structures, more efficient structures, and articulating slabs, ribbing and reticulation patterns, but also the tectonism, and integrating environmental engineering phenomenologically with, and let's say through brise-soleil systems which adapt closely to sun directions and overshadowing. So there's a lot of themes we developed at a Design Research Lab, and because when in the company if you have a new project and you basically speed from project to project, and each time you only have a few weeks to come up with a concept and develop the idea, to present a photorealistic, let's say, presentation to win a competition, it's very hard to bring in these kind of more substantive, important, paradigmatic innovations. So that's very important. The collaboration with university becomes very important. And I think that's also the most rewarding for staff who can come in and participate in original research. Of course, I'm talking about master degree level and post-professional level, which we have at the AA, but in Vienna we were also teaching we could do it even on the undergraduate level, or this was not differentiated into bachelor master at this time. People would stay with us in one studio for 7 years. You can build up, and so we have older and younger students in this masterclass concept, and a very large class of 60, developing themes across many years, because the students would carry on for 6 years with us, and they was feeding in new students and the older students coming in, but there's a kind of big group working together at DRL. So that was for 15 years very important. And at DRL we also have 18 months, but we always have the graduates working with us, coming back to tutor the incoming group, but also we have 2 generations working in parallel, in a large overlap period where they feed in the knowledge. There's a large knowledge transfer.
But this was set up in AA London, right?
That was an AA, and the other one was looking at the Angewandte in Vienna. These are the 2 places. AA now for 25 years. Vienna, we did it at the Bazaar for 15 years. And then I developed a PhD program in Vienna with that group, and took some of the research into the PhD level, which was necessary, and then beyond that into research teams at the office. So now we're having nearly at 10% of the firm is dedicated research teams who also participate and contribute to projects, but they are all operating differently. They are research-based, research-focused. That is a luxury. We're now over 500 people. Is something which not many architectural firms can afford. That's why, as an alternative, schools of architecture, and that's what before we could afford these research teams, we're working with the schools. Very important, but this is the absolute exception, that you have that close integration, that you have working on exciting innovations, which then have real legs in the real world, because a lot of these ideas we've been exploring are now, built realities. That's very rare. Just look around me, the rest of, for instance, a school, and I've just been teaching obviously at Harvard, and at Yale, actually, we had a studio for several years, Harvard several times, and other schools, and I know many other schools through visiting as a critic and so on. And unfortunately, in the last few years, there has been a diversion, and it's not only schools. This you also can see it at the Venice Biennale and the Chicago Architecture Biennale and many other exhibitions and public events, that there is a shift away from gearing discourse to what's really going on a big scale in urban development, and shifting that focus away to, let's say, the margins of development in this agenda for, let's say, looking at issues of equity and social justice. So you look at groups and populations maybe who are left behind, and concentrate on that. And that is not something which architects really can work on, because these populations and arenas and regions, they have much more basic problems. They wouldn't hire, a London-based architect.
Yes.
It wouldn't make sense, because what they need is, proper infrastructure.
Exactly.
Basic things we take for granted for the last 75 years, like proper water system, heating, proper buildings, etc. Which and they would the economic aspect of is primary. But that's as well. The other big story, of course, is sustainability, and that has been taken over. I mean, not that it's not an important topic, but it can be the only topic any architect at all times talks about at all conferences and at schools of architecture, etc. So the discourse has been usurped, let's say, and let's say is crowded out. Those aspects which we are most interested in, and actually most important, I would believe, in developing, the knowledge economy and developing high-density urban clusters around the world in the major metropolis, using the latest technology, using the latest sophisticated design tools, and really gearing up on skill, and the skill also to integrate and make complex mixed-use, let's say, urban nodes like a TOD. I mean, these things are sophisticated. These would be great master degree projects. Or developing on an urban scale. But if you only been engaging with slums in Latin America or with development problems in Africa and etc., you are you can't then they don't have the skill and the thinking to engage the problems the profession faces. So that is, I think, the problem. There is this idea of a sense of moral duty, perhaps, or a social conscience, which then once you start looking at the world like this, it seems what we are doing is glib or is not connected to this kind of global development
problem solving.
But the problems in these regions and places, they're political problems, right?
Exactly.
And economic problems, and these are huge debates and development economic, and to try to tease out and understand why some societies find the development path and others don't find it.
No.
There is, of course, issues of colonialism, imperialism, underdevelopment of political issues. So once you look at these issues, you realize that architecture isn't the problem and architecture isn't the solution. And so, but it takes over everything. And then when what we showing is then looked at as, inverted commas, complicit with neoliberalism, etc. So it's being sneered at, and there's a kind of supposed moral high ground to dealing with, inverted commas, the margins. And I'm sure what I'm saying here, but I get a lot of backlash because there's a lot of moralizing critique, and also the risk of this being then marginalized from the discourse if one isn't following this or isn't even critical of this. I understand the impetus. It all started, I think, it's this post-2008, the post-financial crisis. That's where I noticed this starting, but getting into real full swing a few years later, but you had not only did you have a lot of unemployment around the world, and also in architecture, and then a year later we had the European debt crisis, and all across Europe before we had the Middle East and so on tanking. The only economy which kept going, and for architects was our lifeline also, was actually China. And but
could be Russia. Yeah,
directly connected and integrated with the Western discourse is also being looked at as problematic. So it's a big shame. So basically students and a lot of studios at school, they become research in social issues which are difficult to be addressed with architecture, and there's a lot of debate and talk and exploring the problem. No time to design, but also whatever you can design there is not going to be of the level. It is not going to be 21st century. It's very low tech. That's not in itself a problem, but so then you have mostly this debate and problem exploration. Very little design. The design that is simple, minimal interventions, community integrating, participatory ideas, etc., or you directly go away from human habitation and focus a lot of people focus on biodiversity and so on and so forth, and that basically leaves students without the relevant skills, technical skills, so they don't have the not technical knowledge and skills, nor do they have the software knowledge and skills, nor do they have the experience of thinking through a large complex project in a complex urban environment. So basically we cannot hire out of this, unfortunately, at all. So we have to build our own pipeline to find staff, and that's not only me teaching at the UL, but others. We have quite a few others in the firm who are teaching in different schools of architecture at the Bartlett as well, and in quite a few other places. So we have a pipeline, but it's really if you look for the overall discipline, that's these pipelines are drop in the ocean or very minor, like this little trickles, which is enough for us, but that doesn't feed the rest of the discipline. So I think there's a real problem.
But architecture has always been esteemed for its contribution to sustainable building practices, as we are saying. We emphasize sustainability and meaningful design contribution. However, I find only a small number of architects and urban planners actively participate in shaping development policies, which ultimately impacts the profession. In your view, do you believe there is a significant gap that could be bridged by involving architects or urban planners who study about the built environment more deeply in the policy development?
Yeah, I think unfortunately a lot of policy is about policy of prevention. So you have NIMBYs, in particular in England. That's very important because you have decision making for planning applications is localized, and most local councillors and councils are councils of prevention and slowdown. They're actually campaigning literally on this to stop further development in their borough. So that's one big problem. Then there is of course some things going on, but those things which are being pushed forward, they are way too slow. There's huge delays and not dense enough. So if you have in a city like London, which wants to be and could be and is to some extent still the fastest growing city or metropolis in the whole of Europe, but it's getting harder and harder because prices explode and people coming in for their career opportunity, because it's a lovely and wonderful place where you have fantastic companies and stimulating cultural offerings and fantastic universities and people coming in, but there's no accommodation. So they're squeezing into bedsits and shared flats, into the corners and nookies and crannies, paying an arm and a leg for a flat share in a former council house, etc., etc. That's the reality. And then the politicians don't allow, for instance, the private sector to build nice small houses, or student housing that is being built is kind of oversubscribed and also highly profitable, but they're not allowed to expand that beyond students. They're saying, so well, these are too small for dignified life, so we only tolerate students to do that temporarily. But this kind of product, co-living product, similar to student housing and nicer with more shared spaces, is just being held up in planning and not allowed. And so there's a lot of this. I think that it could be wonderful, walkability, densification with a lot of co-living, super small units, but a lot of shared facilities, building out many districts of London. And it would be fantastic for the economic takeoff, but it's just politically prevented. So we need to first point, we need to get the politics out of the way. Primarily, that's the role of politics, unfortunately, at this point. And
do you find this similar in other geographies as well, or it's
yeah, of course. In New York, it's the same. And you find that you can go where these, and of course the whole Silicon Valley and San Francisco is like this. I mean, it's atrocious. That's why people are moving out of there as well, because they can't afford it. So, but there's a huge dilemma. If you're an entrepreneur, or you're an ambitious employee, become entrepreneur, and you want to come, all the best jobs are in London, or in, let's say in Palo Alto and Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And so you either have to go there and, pay 80% of your salary to accommodate,
to rent, yeah,
just be part of that. And that means you living a kind of life of semi-deprivation. Maybe you can do that on your 20s and 30s. I did. But then you have to postpone building a family, or that becomes, the contract goes up. You have to then kind of ramp up in the hierarchy fast enough that, and you'll be a bit older when you start having kids, perhaps. But this is really difficult. Or you decide, no, I'm not going there. I'm going to, a more provincial place. And then this is a waste of talent. And also this career, the career of this, yes, these persons live a slightly more comfortable life, but their career path is not the same. It's stunted. And they will progress a little bit, and they will never reach their full potential. And that's the waste these urban restrictions generate. So that is simply prevention of allowing these populations to gather. It's a comfort in the places. And it's difficult to open up a totally new place. Of course, with California being so kind of difficult, then you have now, Austin, Texas, or you have Denver, and you have, you have other places, Florida, where people move to, but it's hard. You can't recreate that intense industry cluster quickly somewhere else, and it's also huge waste. So you spend 20 years of trying to build it. I mean, but it really would have to be a mass exodus and resettling into new, of course, Elon Musk shifting, these kind of things are signal events. But otherwise you have still, you have the Bay Area, and that's hard. And similarly, to open up another New London, first of all, in other parts of the UK, you have the restrictions are also crazy. And the interesting thing is that the city of London, the square mile where I said this is a fantastic, superb kind of flourishing districts. And it was wonderful about you have all these kind of old alleys still there and old buildings mixed in. And but
contrast is there.
Is that possible? Because they have a totally different political institution. They were kind of left behind a relic from medieval times, a sort of self-governance structure where actually all the banks and different firms and law firms, they are the ones who are voting the councillor. They are the ones who establishing city government rather than residents, which are very few there. And that's where they also realize that it's a tragedy the way they can't allow residences to be built there, because as soon as you let more residences in, inverted commas, they will kill that dynamic, because
That,
the political system, they're empowered to block. And for the residents, there are residences. Of course, the Barbican, for instance, is part of the City of London, but the residences are outnumbered by the businesses. So, and that's very healthy in terms of that development dynamic, which is extraordinary and amazing, and is part of the reason why, London is such a fantastic global financial center. I don't think it's totally accidental that this is that this financial industry had the opportunity to be gifted that square mile of let it rip.
Control it. Well, Zaha Hadid as an organization has worked across the geographies. How do you integrate local culture and context into your design, particularly when it's completely a non-European or non-UK culture?
Yeah, I mean, that's very nice. So within the heuristics and principles of parametricism, we have enshrined this idea of adaptiveness. Right? It's not the rollover generic. It's the universal principles, but they're highly sensitive to local context. And that is just particular site constellations where we don't insist on doing a box or some symmetrical configuration, but we can blend in and multiply affiliate to different conditions and adapt our building to these conditions, also the way we're programming it. So that is site adaptivity, but also more broadly, if you have local cultures, for instance, climatic issues become very prominent. If you go, for instance, in the Middle East, where modernism try to roll out, it's the same kind of glass towers everywhere. We come in and do something much more learning from the vernaculars, because passive systems, courtyards, shaded courtyards, deep facades, shading, working with air, being more attentive to airflow. Otherwise, you're really sitting in kind of ovens in your courtyard. So that is actually coming through the scientific principles, through ecological ideas, but then also we're quite in picking up local materials, which is also sustainable and embeds the project into its context, and also makes sense that you have certain type of colors and stones in an area where the dust would anyway turn it in that third color. So we definitely have very, very strongly done that in the Middle East. In China, we have done that partially. So China is, a culture in some parts, in Shenzhen, for instance, that just want to be at the forefront, 21st century, and heritage is not the agenda. And I think that's healthy if you say, okay, we have a global, sophisticated, let's say, knowledge economy and technological civilization, and we are just at the forefront of that, and that's what we're expressing in our architecture. And that has very little to do with whether you have Anglo-Saxon or Han Chinese roots or German roots. That's kind of washed out, and rightly so. However, when it comes to government projects and cultural projects, there is also the desire in China to be connected with its own heritage and cultural features. And sometimes we've done projects where we make and they have it is also partly ecological. We have these kind of heavy these changes in climate and rain and so on. You have these roofs, which are features of you can't use it in tall buildings, but these beautiful roofs and also courtyard typology. They're interesting things, a different engagement with the urban, where we have learned for our projects to integrate with features which come through from the urban architectural culture of China. And that's also a desire, and there's a sense of heritage and heritage preservation, but also a sense of embedding and alluding to features of Chineseness, inverted commas. So we also have catered for that and done that, I would say, particularly on cultural projects and on urban projects where we can look at, there's interesting urban models like the smaller alleys, hutongs, and particular courtyard conditions. So we looked at that and we referred to that. So these will be the main examples, Asia and Middle East, where we've done that.
Nice. Moving on to our last segment, we call it as a futuristic lens. But the buzzword of this year has undeniably been an AI. How Zaha Hadid Architects is incorporating AI into the design process, and what stage of the design AI has helped to achieve efficiency in the process?
So we observing AI and the development of neural networks, which were done originally before these big models came out, were done within the architectural community. Inspired by, of course, for instance, generative adversarial networks, and former students and colleagues of mine, developing that, like the Deep Himmelblau with Dario Bolojan, or we watched Refik Anadol using our Oeuvre to generate models and so on. It was fascinating. We then worked with Refik on an exhibition and we developed these tools more. So I was observing it, and before the latest, let's say up to 2 years ago, these results were interesting but not compelling. Not compelling enough for us to get into it. Just being kind of early observers.
Such floating at the surface.
You can say that the Himmelblau as a company that's worked better because they have very rugged compositions.
Okay.
Where these kind of rather unresolved, these models didn't get coherent compositions, they get perspective necessarily right, they didn't get light and shadow right. But in the Himmelblau project, you have multiple perspectival, so this was more congenial. I don't think these systems would have worked for us, but with the advent of DALL-E 2, about 2 years ago, through Refik, it really optimized, it shifted. Suddenly you have a qualitative shift, and suddenly the results were indeed very, very good and usable and compelling. So we started to get into it since then. The Midjourney came along and we exploring that, and Stable Diffusion, and more recently, in recent months, as we work more with this, we started to tailor these models for our own purposes, and developing codes and tools around these models, particularly with Stable Diffusion, which is an open source system. So we have a research team now and a research and development team building our own tools, training up networks, additional networks, feeding in our Oeuvre more specifically. I mean, we are lucky because our Oeuvre is all over the internet, and therefore we can refer back to our own. We can talk, ZHA, Zaha Architects, or parametrism, these kind of phrases deliver a lot of interest. We can also obviously mix a bit of Frei Otto, who's one of the greatest architect, and a huge influence in my greatest heroes in architecture. So that's all fantastic, but now we have more specific tools we're building. And that's what we have now, and they're already being used and they're effective. So rather than having just subscribing to an all-purpose model, I think that's important for the discipline as a whole, to develop models and use image AI to tailor more to our demands, so we can be more strategic and not just have inspirational sketches, but parameterize and have constraints, and then iterating parts while other parts are fixed already, to be more strategic in developing the image of course, in the end, we have to obviously 3D model it. But if you have something which is already fitting better the site and constraints, and it's nearly, you can also use it as rendering out a sketch model you had to begin with. This interaction between 3D modeling and image variation, image
text
extrapolation, rendering inverted ones, that becomes very strategic. But I also like still the kind of wild exploration at the beginning with all these strange hybrids and experimental, let's say, prompts. I think it's very, very fertile. So it really is also a tool of not only speeding up the process of being more versatile and more creative. And I think that's obviously something which everybody can do. So it really opens up competition, I think, interestingly, and a lot of people can easier catch up with the kind of computational talent we have developed in-house. So that's an interesting pressure of competition coming at us. But we feel very confident that we're ahead of the curves with our research, and also particular, of course, downstream competent realization. That's where really we separate out those who can do quick images which look sexy, but they would have no chance to realize it. So it's exciting. So we're full on, but also we're looking beyond image AI into other mechanisms of AI. We have other generative tools, more working with modules, parametric modules, and aggregating all, furnishing out, fitting out large floor plates with furniture according to criteria, and then running simulations across that. But also this idea of modular aggregations to really have detailed, interesting configurations and variations early on. And the context for this is also the metaverse. So I think the metaverse will benefit enormously from that as well, where the amount of work which will come towards us, because I think it's architects or designers who will build out metaverse, the amount of work which is coming at us is so huge that first of all the discipline can grow, but also the AI tools will help us a lot to cope with that.
The prevailing trends indicate a gradual shift towards data-driven decision-making, where BIM and information management plays a vital role in making informed decisions. How does Zaha Hadid architects utilize this data to inform their decision throughout the design and construction stages of a building project?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a lot of simulation tools. I mean, for instance, we have an environmental design group, specialist modeling group, focusing on that. And that's where we are at the early stages, always exploring particular sun exposure, wind circulation. We're also anticipating, let's say, the certification potentials for projects. We're building up our own database. We're measuring up all our back catalog in terms of carbon footprint, etc. So we're building our own database. We working with, as I said, a lot of optimization tools, and we developing also this research team around social functionality simulations. But I was mentioning earlier, and that's where we also go back to clients to have surveys and offering surveys to getting the whole database of their staff with all their team affiliations, departmental affiliation, status levels, but also an interesting database which we can ingest and work with is intranet or internal communication messaging, and who is messaging to who, to generate network diagrams and feeding that into the agent population. So we've done that with our own firm, and we're offering that, rolling that out for clients. And I am personally also involved in a very interesting company called Habidatum, where I'm sitting on the advisory board. And we've been working with them before. There's a startup company they're using for urban development. They have a lot of interesting data on circulatory data, traffic, but also social media data. Certain publications or posts about places to and more, including monetary exchanges. So all the sales coming through in a certain region, in a certain in a geographically located sales, money transfers. So to understand where the action is in terms of retail, for instance, or retail, food and beverages, and so on and so forth. So they have very interesting, and they're building kind of historical models also to see, to get some kind of histogram of an urban district with all these data sets. These companies that have a subscription model for mostly geared towards developers, but then developers would also, of course, feed that to the architects, and it's in the urban planning stages, but also building up a business model. And the other interesting companies we're working with are looking at, like X-School in China, using AI to simulate the use mixes which are possible within the planning envelope, and but also optimizing for footprint exploitation, but also then economic exploitation of sites, which in the end, sounds, as an economic explanation, it sounds kind of callous and no, but this means end user value.
And
So in my philosophy, if you a successful business venture and business model in urban development, it can only make money and make a return if it satisfies end users, if it is fully utilized, if it is vibrant, and if the products are seen to be attractive and worth what they have cost to build. I mean, that's the problem. If you're not profitable, then you really have ended up wasting resources. In the end, the whole thing isn't even used, and you have to kind of bulldoze it. But even if you don't, then somebody takes a loss. You go bankrupt, and somebody else can kind of buy this all the cheap, and then rent it out. But it's still a huge waste. The biggest waste, of course, when you have to kind of totally repurpose or even bulldoze unprofitable real estate investments, but also imagine that investors, and these are all of us with our pensions, etc. Putting up a huge investment, building something, miscalculating the attractiveness. So we don't make a profit, we make a loss. That's really a dead weight loss for society, because in the end, there's wealth destruction.
Yes.
Because this land could have been used better, and we would all be better off. The construction materials and energy and all the labor could have been used better somewhere else, and that means, in retrospect, that's the waste. It's like when you waste your time in doing things which don't come to fruition.
Exactly.
So that's what we have to realize, that that's why I'm a pro-market guy, because not necessarily pro-business, because big business is often monopolistic and but usually only in collusion with politics. But if you have open market, competitive markets, everybody wins. And that's where you also, and if you get the signaling early on, or what works or which doesn't work and wouldn't work, that's why we're also working on models where you have early versions and early marketing. You can get sense, you can still change gear, you can still shift, but the politics often prevents that. First of all, they don't allow for early marketing. Second, anyway, they're fixing all the unit mixes and sizes, and the whole product is in advance, and that makes it hard. That's why a lot of developers don't build if the market shifts a little bit, because they've been squeezed to the corner. And so we have this project in London, big Twin Tower project, where we're 5 years in, making iterations and 3.5 years, 4 years negotiating with planner, and then market changes and we have to redo things, value engineer, and refill it. Then we have to re-ask for permission. I mean, that wouldn't be happening. This building could be up and running and the best product market fit, which we would have been able to discover if we hadn't politicians thinking they know better. But what's good for the community if these projects are not happening? And whatever old, decrepit or unused thing is kind of still sitting there blocking the environment, and because the politicians prevent development. We have so many sites like this in London. So that's my motivation is, I've been accused of I'm only interested in the rich, only interested in money and so on and so on. No, human flourishing and having and seeing cities flourish and being used and viable, and that's for me is the criteria of success. But the interesting thing is it correlates nicely with profit, and so it should be, because that developer who got the knack, who got the right methodology, if his money is replenished and some, he can do the next great thing.
Exactly.
And that's what I've seen with some fantastic entrepreneurs who've been really doing so much for for many cities, like God, I forgot the name. The guy who developed the Royal in New York and the Delano in Miami and the XYZ here. It's great new concepts for hotels, and using Philip Stark, this fantastically drawing new experiences, let's say, and bringing it to life. So I love entrepreneurs like this. They obviously make some profit to do the next great thing. And that's what you find. You find in entrepreneurs, when I'm one of them in the British course, what we really care about. We have missionary zeal and passion to generate a better world, and we need the profit principle to also keep us in check, because otherwise I would run away and do stuff way out of cost. Just for the heck of it, and burn everybody's resources. No, we need the profit and loss system to discipline, but also it is something I believe in, and that's the disciplining I respect. I don't respect the disciplining which comes from politicians who have been voted in through some demagoguery 4 years ago on some kind of issue which has nothing to do with the issues they're now kind of controlling. And I don't respect them telling me, no, you're sorry, man, you can't do that here. But I believe in the crowd, which, in the market process, which tells me, shit, what I've done wasn't wanted.
So I have been personally studying your paper regarding sustainability within a market-based ecological order.
Oh, right. Sure.
And that was the interesting one, where you have written about the trading for carbon offsets, and it has been envisioned that unified market for carbon offsets could be worth 100 billion by 2030. In your opinion, do you think trading could be the solution, or the industries which are clogging the atmosphere with heat-trapping gases needs to rethink, and new environmental-centric technology needs to be established?
I mean, of course, the carbon trading gives the incentive. I mean, there are two mechanisms. One is where you have carbon caps. It's a cap and trade, where the government imposes a cap. It's better than imposing particular restrictions on industry. For instance, no power station here, or only XYZ here, and only, now we have in architecture, we have 40% of the internal room facade can only be glass.
Yeah.
And you get these kind of small...
the window ratio.
Architects desperately try to make the window look larger from the outside, and half of the metal panel, and from the inside it's very claustrophobic and dark. I don't believe in these kind of literal impositions. I rather say that that an industry or developer or company has carbon cap, but it can use more if it buys in more, and if it doesn't want to use all, it can sell. So it's allowance. So you get these allowances and you get trading. The other interesting thing is, and I think that's much better than every building. I mean, it makes no sense to impose this kind of restrictions on every single building when some buildings could be so much more productive and beautiful and exhilarating with more glass. But I'm not saying, and that doesn't need to be, we need to allow for these exceptions and let them then buy whatever that carbon extra, which is, then they know it will be utilized to the fullest because they also get return. People come and flock to this place, and then you can pay for that, and somebody else. So the places where we can save the carbon without compromising our lives can only be discovered in the market process, and cannot be prescribed by politicians. Then they make us all poorer, and they make all our lives kind of gray. Because ultimately, if you can't make sustainability the ultimate, because that would mean don't build.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So we have to, first of all, the value is build something which is life enhancing, which allows us to flourish, more productive. Then we can also afford technology to save more carbon. So we have to grow the economy, and that's not means more material. That means value grows, and degrowth is really the end of everything. So, but when it comes to the article again, so cap and trade, but also which is interesting and more even refreshing, that you have a lot of these commitments by industry.
Okay.
Zero carbon commitments, voluntary commitments. And I find, and that has a lot of legs, and it generates a substantive market for all these carbon offset projects. So you make the commitments, and the way you realize them, on the one hand, of course, you try to save energy and look at your own processes, etc., and filtration, and etc., whatever is possible. But then the rest you buy in offsets.
Okay.
And this market, and this means forest, creating new forests and reforestation, etc., or other carbon sink projects. So they will be financed by these commitments. So and that makes sense. So if you can't go further of cleaning up your industry, but if you can compensate this with new forests, which eat up all that carbon, that's great. And then we have more forests as well. I think without that, we won't get there. So I think these are the mechanisms I trust. I believe in this carbon trading as being a great mechanism. I think the voluntary is great, because if you make it restrictive, wait. If you impose it, that will crowd out the voluntary. Then people say, okay, I'm doing what I had to do. I don't like being told what to do, but now I've done what I have to do. Say, look with charity. Let's say when you had, since we have the welfare state and entitlement, and supposedly it is all looked after and taken care of, the percentage of resources flowing into charities has diminished dramatically. For instance, the 19th century and up into the early 20th century, charitable giving was taken care of. Large part of the welfare. The other one was self-organized mutual aid societies. That was taken care of, health insurance and pensions and so on, and unemployment insurance. And then for the, let's say, those who can't kind of catch up, you had charity. Now, both of these mechanisms were working rather well, and also considering the overall level of development much lower. So you had, people on average, of course, we are now much more affluent and well off than 100 years ago, but 100 years ago, the percentage of charitable giving much higher. So if you think of this kind of logic, I can imagine that it's worthwhile trying to take off these government restrictions and allowing the voluntary dynamics to take off.
Like more organic growth.
If it doesn't, but I think it's worthwhile trying that for 10, 15 years. Anyway, I am somebody who doesn't like, I love freedom and voluntary action and interaction, and I believe that that's best for the world, for society, for our life. We have more pleasant and fulfilling lives. We need economic freedom. It's there's too much red tape. I mean, to become and that means a lot of smaller firms run into these barriers and compliance regimes and difficulties. I mean, that's why you have these kind of indexes of ease to do business around the world, and it correlates massively with GDP per capita and development and growth trajectories. So more freedom usually works, and society seems to be erring on the side of unfreedom, and probably lifting restrictions, or even randomly, just kind of deleting, every year 5% of the restrictions over the next 10 years, even if you pick them at random, it's probably going to improve society. That's how I feel about our political process.
My coming to the last question. Architecture has always been very demanding in terms of input. Do you think a certain work-life balance can be achieved with the evolution of technology? And in conclusion, what recommendation do you have for individuals in design and architecture field to contribute towards building a sustainable environment?
Okay, life-work balance. I mean, don't talk about it when you're 25, okay? Come back to me when you're 35 or beyond, or 40. So, I mean, you can have that, but if you're ambitious, you want to have a flourishing career, and we want to have a company, we need these kind of people in our company to be that company that we are. We require this commitment. That's what I've put in, what everybody puts in. That is it. That's what show. I mean, you simply, and that's also with, okay, unfortunately, incomes aren't as high as the finance sector or law, but you have the same thing there. I mean, people, you can't spread out the work over many, many people who are only working kind of 20 hours a week. That's inefficient, and because you also have then all that coordination and communication work on top. So let's all go part-time. It's probably not going to work, and so yes, of course you'll find a balance a little later in life. And also we have in our company, we have these more stable and regular jobs, and if you're competent and know what you're doing, you plan your week, and you can avoid working late, avoid working on weekends. You can do that and be still full-on productive. But when you're young and you're coming in and you're developing and you not have this competency, and
because that's the learning stage.
You try something else. Yeah, but also you're working on the front end. You're working on competitions.
Exactly.
Where you tend to use more the fresh graduates and the newer, latest tools. Yes, you have to put in late nights and weekends, not continuously, but and you have to build up the skill, and we need to win these competitions, and we have to have that killer instinct of doing more. That's part of the game, and you'll find that the same is you go into the finance sector.
Across the industry,
they work even quite a bit harder than we do. Okay, they have more golden noses after.
Exactly.
We have income potential in our field as well if we're working efficiently, and of course, architecture is more attractive. It's easier, it's a nicer thing to study than law or finance, which is brutal and hard, and not everybody's. Let's say, everybody's talents, but in all industries, life-work balance. It's not a priority in the early years of developing the career.
Okay. So patience is a key.
Yeah, you also have to be patient. You have to be patient. You can't come back with the clean. Well, I've done my bit. Can I rest in the words?
Nice. The market
won't have it. In architecture, there's so many architects who are competing. and just so that's, you have to live with that. I mean, it's an attractive job. A lot of people love it and pour into it. It's creative, it's fun, it's on some sense easy. Sometimes you can just put on your earphones and playing around with the model, etc., etc. So that's why, you have the question sometimes, why are we earning so little? Well, it's demand and supply. We have too many people trying to supply that, which we are supplying. And I mean, obviously, we as art architects here carved out a very nice market, picking the cherries around the globe.
Yeah.
And that delivers more fees. But I mean, also we have to get the ball and do something for that. But we have the high value jobs, and we can pay well. But you have to give a lot. Not when you are, doesn't mean that you can't have a family. I mean, when I started in the company, there was nobody who was even married for the first 10 years. It's just no, even anybody was able to sustain a girlfriend. Forget that. Everyone wanted to leave the company. No weekends, no nothing. I mean, that was us building the company, so that was more intense than what is now happening. But basically, work is life, and that in this historical period. And so that's what I would have to say.
Okay. Thank you
Now I have kids. Finally, I find the time and had a thought.
Nice.